cloud computing only because you are going to be analyzing some part of this. Some of the concepts seems like a review from another course. So we want to kind of review some of the general concept, and then we'll talk about how you can go back and audit cloud platforms and when you're working with specific product and model, and then be able to accommodate that with the security solutions um, as you need. So, when we talk about cloud computing, it really means that we're using someone else's server systems in a remote location. In America, the general products that you see is going to be Amazon Web Services, which is AWS, or Azure, which is owned by Microsoft. So these two are the leading in cloud infrastructure as a service. In other areas where as you would see Google is more emphasizing platform and software as a service as what you see. So the predominant product that you see out there is going to be able to support. Now, a lot of the companies are really pushing or using cloud. It's only because it's cost saving in the long run. You don't have the capital investment for your data center or even your local servers. You might have your local servers, but it will not be able to scale. Or if you want options like backup options or things that would allow you to be more uh, portable and flexible with your solutions in IT. So definitely there's a lot of major benefits, and because someone else is managing the systems that you lease, disruption, availability tends to be heightened and it maintained, even though your contract with cloud will require that you maintain software and the security component in your packages. But availability and flexibility and scalability is definitely one of the key area, and also cost, right? Because over time, the maintenance in that can be quite a bit, especially with hardware. And then the area that we're going to look into is the security portion. There's some misunderstanding in this and the liability and the responsibility from the provider and the customer. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So in answering the question, we want to kind of define cloud computing. And cloud computing it entails any kind of services that is remotely used. So it needs to be over a network. So that means that in order to use that service, you have to connect it through your own network. We can use applications like what you've seen with Microsoft Office 365. You have to have an internet connection through your network in order to use the app. Maybe we would be able to use cloud instances. So when I say cloud instances, it really means virtual machine that exists on the remote server. Just like how you're using the virtual machine on your local computer, it's on the server systems, and you're able to spin that up and run your server as part of your infrastructure. Um, or it could also be a storage location where you would store text messages and communication across your devices, like your IoT devices. So there are many different types of options. So cloud computing just means that you are using services that's delivered over the network. So you need to connect to it. And with that in mind, if we don't have network connections, right, we will not be able to reach our cloud systems. So a lot of the security solutions really say that, oh, okay, well, our backup failover cluster is going to be cloud systems that's hosted on, let's say, Amazon data center. But in the case of emergencies or things like earthquake, tornado, etc., what you see is that you might not have connection to these cloud systems instantly, right? So you have to really think about an alternate way to really connect through your network to your cloud system if you're going to integrate it. So the example that I provided, and I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with these. Azure supports for all types of model and also products for Microsoft. And the majority of the business use Microsoft products, especially with authentication server, um, even things like for remote desktop, but you might also have people who are using web server with Microsoft. Not too much, but you do have clients that have that. AWS hosts a lot of different things too, right? Storage, you can have infrastructure on there. You can implement Windows servers along with Linux servers running AWS. And then you have the application side where you would see this with Google Suite, where you would have an application for Word or documents, you would have an application for presentation and so on, along with Microsoft Office. Now, this is proprietary, as you know, right? You get licenses as students for 2 years through the institution, but Microsoft Office is not free to the public compared to G Suite um, as a cloud application. So looking into the notes, we would see that there are different services model throughout different type of certifications. If you're gonna go for Cloud Plus, which it doesn't hurt to obtain. I think having cloud knowledge is always useful for your field. It talks about service model, and these are the common service model. Software as a service, we see this with Office 365, Google Suite, or application that you run online like Adobe Express, right? Things that you use through your network connection to be able to open up the web apps. Typically, they are. And then the majority of the enterprises, you would see infrastructure as a service. This allows the client to be able to have services like setting up. So when we say infrastructure, it really entails the entire set of systems for the network, right? If you're talking Windows type of infrastructure, you would have DNS, Active Directory, right? Along with DHCP. And those can be instances, virtual machines that you can spin up that is located at the remote data center where you would set up your services. You can also have databases, application server, and so on. And with that, you would also have controls or security and maintenance for your system. So when you see product like EC2 with Amazon AWS, this allows you to build out your virtual machine. Now, you pay for what you get in these. I've written many labs, including with scripting for this. So Amazon AWS have a CLI, command line interface, where you can run it straight from your Linux terminal. Um, and then you can authenticate to it with secure, and then it's going to push your security token. Once you logged in, you can go into your cloud systems, your EC2, and then set up your instances. So for example, I want to run an Ubuntu Linux server, and it would give you, if you use the free tier, it's going to be like minimal processor, minimal RAM. So that means that your server is going to be generally slow. But if you want a little bit faster server, right, you can select a different tier. They can also allow you to pay as you go. So, sometimes you need more heavy duty systems compared to, something that would be less. So elasticity has been implemented for cloud solutions. So that's what you see. And then sometimes you have a mix of these model being integrated depending on the type of services that the organization needs. So when we're looking at somebody like a Fortune 500 company, like an enterprise like Walmart, um, they would need different models integrated for their cloud, right? So platform as a service, it is a little bit different than infrastructure in that it really focuses on the application side, right? So that means that I would have web apps that I'm running possibly for my customer to be able to either make an appointment, purchase products online, set up delivery in the case of retailer, right? And it really emphasized the web-based languages to be able to accommodate the application with that platform. So you are going to have PHP server, right, for your web server, and then on top of that, you can run different type of web applications being integrated for that specific system. And so what you see is it's really in provision within. So when you're looking at infrastructure, it really entails platforms because infrastructure as a whole, you also have application services, right? You also have web component. So when we say infrastructure, it kind of entails the web application side of the house. But let's say that if you're a software company, and I gave this example to the Wednesday class, that you make software for medical billing, okay? And that's all you do, right? You're still going to have to host it so you can run it only as platform as a service, right? And then so when the doctors and the nurses, when they document that, the patient file, it's going to go into a database and the software is going to pull from the database in order to plug in the billing for the services when the patient visit the hospital or the medical center. So you see that this can be a portion, a level of the infrastructure, whereas you would have a number of servers that specifically emphasize the web application side. Whereas infrastructure, it deals with like authentication. But wait a minute, you have web application that authenticate client too, right? So ultimately, you would see this particular solution for the model is typically more common because it also entailed this, right? Okay. So for two, it asks if a design code company is using Adobe Creative Cloud, right, to create art design for products. What type of cloud service model is Adobe Creative Cloud? We have Adobe Creative Cloud for students and faculty to use, right? It is a way that we can access cloud application or web application to be able to access Adobe specific products, right? You can use Photoshop within that. You can use other Adobe product through Creative Cloud. Now, student licenses, you still have the full access also compared to also business, right? So with Creative Cloud, you're going to have to pay for that if you are design company. So it is specifically software as a service. Same thing with Adobe Express or their other products, right? So anytime that you're using software, right, through the internet, that becomes software as the service. For three, what type of cloud service model allows customer to retain control and are responsible for maintaining, upgrading software and OS? And this is infrastructure as a service. Why? Because you are going to have server systems, right? Windows or Linux servers to be able to maybe if you're using that for web hosting, or for authentications, like my Windows Server 2019, for example. I might have an instance for that. DNS, Active Directory, like I mentioned, even DHCP to set up a system that would lease out IP addresses for your network. So, infrastructure as a service, we are required to maintain the software and operating system is part of that. Why? Because the cloud company typically they just give you, right, the machine to work with. A lot of the time it starts with an operating system that it's equipped with. But as you know, Microsoft requires seat license. That means that if you have a server that you create to be able to authenticate 1,000 customers, you're going to have to pay licenses for the users to use your system. Microsoft requires a certain tier for you to pay so that way you can have licenses for users. So for here, as an institution for education, they have students and staff and faculty logging in and using the service and the product for Microsoft. They pay the seats for that, right? The school does. So you see infrastructure, you're required to maintain and upgrade your own software. And then they do a little bit of the hardware maintenance and making sure that their system is available, the storage is there for you, right? Depending on what you pay for. The cloud company does that, but you have to maintain your software. And then we talked about platform as a service. So Agnico wants to release cloud service and run his financial monitoring software. So if they use specifically just for this part of the software or this software, that will be the model that they use. So can company use this and this together? Sure, you can. You can have something, for example, like I can have infrastructure as a service for my internal organization or my local area network systems. I would be able to set that up. And then I would use platform as a service, maybe for software for my vendor, or that can be a separate side. You can incorporate it all together, so you can have a hybrid environment. But typically, you would see that sometime in the need, you're gonna have a combination. And then for 5, cloud service model that allows serverless application architecture, which the developer write functions in response to events. So this is often found in automated environment now, or if you're looking at something that is like in a manufacturing environment, you might have robotic systems or autonomous systems that would, let's say, package, shipments, or pick products, right? You see a lot of this in the warehouse as well. This type of systems it doesn't require higher level control, but it's only going to focus on the task. So if I have systems that are just going to identify the product and drop it into the bucket, right? That's simply a function. So it's a process that's executed. And so you don't really need anything else beyond that. And I think that we are moving into this direction a little bit more. This is something new that was added to the service model more recent compared to the other model that we've seen in the past. Okay. Do you have any question for me? Okay. So when you deploy and as you go through the notes, it gives you various example. Function as a service is on page 2. Now, the service model compared to the deployment model. So how can an organization select, right? What would be a good option to go with? Public cloud is going to be for the public access. You might have cloud services so that way everybody can, store their photos, which is what you see with like Google Photo, right? You might have like a drive option where you would limit that to 10 gigs so that way people can upload their files and back up their files that way. So, public cloud model is a deployment where it is accessible to everyone, whereas a private cloud model is where it is specifically owned by the individual. Um, so if you're looking at organizations that have their data center, even though remote data center, they would then have a private cloud. So that way they can house their service and they have that ownership and they would have control to be able to provision the services that they need. So the capacity of that is, so if you lease this through AWS, let's say that I want my private cloud for, my North American stores, like if I'm Walmart, then I would then have to pay the lease for those systems and maintain it. And that would be specifically for my company, my user, my customer, and so on. And that's considered private to that company. And then you also have community cloud, where you would have people who partner up to be able to establish this, right? So let's say that I I am a college, right? And I want to have cloud options, and I would partner up with other colleges and universities to be able to accommodate that because that way I can have number one the maintenance shared across multiple partners. Two, the cost is also being shared. So that way you can also share services, software licenses, and so on. So there's benefit in community cloud in that if you're using the same type of product, like software, or if you're using, resources that are similar, it's probably ideal to kind of partner up with local, regional people to be able to accommodate that. And the example here is like digital library. Sometimes you would have a group of entity that would be able to do that for security and compliance and cost effectiveness reasons. Any question? Okay. And then the hybrid is a combination of those, right? So for 6, it asks you what type of cloud deployment model requires the use of technology that unifies different cloud offerings into a single coherent platform. So if you have different models, you are going to have some kind of tool, right, or a dashboard to be able to conform all of these models so that way you can manage it seamlessly. It's important to do that. So that way you're not going into different places and different product in order to juggle and manage that. So it would require a way that you can combine them together, two different options, so that way you can ultimately manage your storage, your files, your resources, your applications, your licenses, and so on. So that is a hybrid option. Now, as I mentioned before, right, the question of responsibility, it really drills down to your service level agreement, your SLA. SLA is a document that entails an agreement between the vendor and the customer on their own which part of the responsibility is the customer and which part is the provider, right? So the requirement for the cloud customer is divided. Typically 50% or higher responsibility for the customer. So if you have one service provider like AWS, or if you have AWS and Azure, right, um, you're still gonna be able to accommodate the responsibility in the security environment with this cloud company. So your agreement is very clear. They are going to ask you to maintain your security specifically almost 100%. They're going to protect their physical systems in the remote, right, data center, but your cybersecurity team is going to do a shared responsibility. That means that you are going to monitor your networks, right? Your cloud network. You are going to monitor the activity, potential attacks. You are going to audit it for compliance need, and you are going to make sure that you prevent breach, right? So that's the responsibility that is shared. So the provider, what do? They're still going to protect their investment. However, what you do on your systems, what configuration, what you're blocking and you're allowing, that's your responsibility. So you have to maintain that over time. So in the past, cloud is not a new technology. It sounds new, but it's been around for a long time. We have always done remote um, data center for backup, even in the mainframe days, right? That was in the 80s and the 90s, where these giant systems were used for like, storage purposes, file servers, etc. But we have coined the term cloud because then Amazon came and said, we want to be able to provide services so that way people can rent our servers to be able to do their business. So a lot of the time, people tend to think of cloud as a way to transfer the risk, but that's not true. Okay. Because the responsibility is mostly yours when you are leasing. It's like I rent a storage, right, to put my extra stuff at home that I cannot store at home in my garage or whatnot. Those used storage place. So what you do with it is going to be up to you. Whatever you put inside it is up to you, but it's your responsibility to lock it. Okay, because if your stuff goes missing and it's unlocked, they're not going to be responsible for that, right? That's why you buy insurance. And then, but then, what if you wanted to paint the storage, or what if you want to attach shelves to it? You have to look at the service level agreement, whether they allow you or not, right? So you can do a lot of things with your cloud systems, and you do have the responsibility to maintain the security component, right? But also, for example, if I'm doing security testing, that when you test, for example, you want to do pen testing on your cloud system, you cannot just launch attacks, okay? You have to ask them for permission. You have to tell them when you're going to do that. AWS has a policy that they do allow denial of service, but if you are doing extensive denial of service, you need to inform them. Typically, it's a good practice to let them know. And then other service provider like Microsoft, you have to make sure that you fill out a form and inform them, and they have to authorize it. So, it's just part of the process. Okay, let's move on to 8. Any question regarding the models? Okay, so DevOps, you probably have seen this already or heard of it maybe. Maybe you have heard of SEC DevOps that include security, development, and operations. Um, so DevOps really is a way that we would combine the development process into the operation. In the past, it's always been like, oh, The company needs a software, we'll ship it off to, we'll outsource it, or we'll hire some developer to make a software for us. Once they have tested everything and it's good to go, we'll incorporate that into deployment. It doesn't work that way anymore. We build as we go, right? Because if you have to wait for a software for a year in order to deploy, by the time the software is released, things are already outdated and then you already have bugs, right? And we have to catch up with the security area. So agile approach allows you to test and release software while you're in operation, and it is more instantaneous, and it needs to be a collaborative between the IT side, which is the operation, because IT is operation, right, to get the updates. So there is still some testing that's involved, but you test and you build as you go. So why do I say ITS operation is because all your systems that involves your daily business operation entail it's under the umbrella of IT. And in the past, it was very separate between development and operation. Typically, development do the work, right? They build the software and then they pass it over to the operation side, but no longer, right? And now, when you hear the term SecDevOps, that also entails security development and operation. That means that you have to have security solutions while you're building your application for the operation. So, in a way, we kind of automate a lot of these things, right? So you ask me, why do we have to push updates every time that we use Linux system, we boot our virtual machine? Because there's that frequent of updates. It's very common now, right, for software developer to release updates day to day, right? So that way we can close out the gaps in security in the application side. But ultimately, you want this, right? The collaboration is going to help you be more effective, right? More efficient in your operation and be able to control a lot of the security components in that area. So when you talk to executive, the IT manager, typically they want SecDevOps or DevOps to, to as a way to really approach all the deployment and the improvement in our system for operation. Any question? Okay, so earlier I talked about cloud security operations and the requirement. This screenshot gives you like different area. And I touch on this a little bit more on Wednesday. And I want to come back to this a little bit. Data is assets for us. All of these systems is really, a way that we can process the data, especially when we're looking at different type of service. So you see software is a way that we can have data that's input and a lot of the time output data, right? So software really, so all service model starts with data. But if you see the darker the highlight, that's going to be the responsibility. You notice that these in infrastructure and platform, the vendor doesn't manage the data. You do, right? How you secure your data and how you handle your data on the move, you encrypt your data, whatever that is in these two, right? That's the customer responsibility. So infrastructure, you're handling your data, your application, and your OS. In the platform, you're managing your data. There's a shared responsibility with the application, and they will manage the operating system that comes with your instances, and it's on their server system. And then if you do SaaS, right, it is a shared responsibility with data, and the vendor handles all the specific. Like you see this with Office 365. So that kind of gives you a better understanding. And then DevOps is on page 3. And in automation now, I think that we're entering a new area of technology as now AI is regularly incorporated in our operation. So automation really becomes part of our infrastructure, right? The way that we think about how we build automation, but automation has always been with the technical area, with IT. For example, we push updates through automation. We don't manually install updates on 10,000 computers, period, right? We push it through the networks. We write scripts to be able to automate that. We upgrade and update through automation. So, infrastructure as code has always been around. It's just more prevalent now that you see a lot of the process is included with more generative AI. Um, so what you see is that cloud services and its feature really speaks to how we can manage the service in a very most efficient automated way. So I would highly encourage you to learn scripting, right? Like shell script, Python scripting, that's regularly used in the technical environment. If you also learn PowerShell for the Microsoft side, it's C based, so there's syntax specific for these type of products. But the benefit for you is that coming into the back end of the house, you are going to see that how we use and reuse the code in order to really maintain operation is very, very dominant, right? You see a lot of that. So it talks about infrastructure as code. And then in the next question, we will address API. So API is application programming interface. Many of you know about API. Typically, it is a program that talks to another program. And it talks about that here. If you need to work with some kind of services, you would write a program to tell it what to do, right? So, um, everything we use is just code, right? Even to the malware level. So, and the application level. So, API is a way that we can incorporate components and feature into the things that we use. So, for example, you use API to authenticate people that has Google account, Instagram account, and Facebook account. You use an OAuth package for that, right? So we just use an API that somebody wrote so that way we can bring in their credential into our web application, into our website. So that way the user doesn't have to recreate an account and reset the password and so on, right? They just use an existing account and that uses an OAuth API. So API helps us seamlessly incorporate different technology, different interface for the user. We can have security application that function in different ways. For example, Nmap, and then incorporate Shodan's API on top of that, so that way, it's able to search and then it's able to also run scripts. So we can footprint or we can find open ports and so on, right? So there are ways that we use API for security and other reasons. That means that when you manage API, it's important that you think about the security side of the house because everything now is web app and web app uses many different API from authentication to file management to different things. Like when I use Canvas, right, in order to for many of your classes that use CompTIA, we use an API to connect the CompTIA to Canvas. That's how it does. It brings in your grades and all of those things, right? So that means that we need to make sure that the keys for the system to talk, the application to talk to one another, right? It requires these keys, needs to be exposed to only a small group. So you have to practice least privilege in this matter. That means that only the people who should be accessing these keys be given access to them. And you should use different APIs for keys for different user, different application, and different services. Don't share the same API because if somebody gets a hold of your API keys, then they are able to modify, right? Change your accounts, change your application configuration, and change your service. So now you can, in some web application, you can regenerate the keys, or sometimes it gives you a key and how you store it and how you share it. You shouldn't share it, but how you use it to link to different application would be specific to your user account, your group membership, your applications, and the services for those applications. So the associated rights is really tied back to the API. So you have to think about like the people who are setting up these API, their role in the organization. Should they be using these APIs, right? The rule for the application itself, like what kind of services you want to be able to allow or not allow. And then you should never transmit API over non-encrypted channels. So when you're sending that in email, make sure that email is encrypted, right? So because that information can be picked up when somebody is running Wireshark on your network, right? It's gonna pull the payload. Or, if they capture that email, they're able to read your API key and use it for things. So when you see like, they're able to pull data and stuff. Where does data come from? Applications, really, right? Okay, never store API key in the encrypted form because API is a way that we use some of the application with another application, but we need to have the keys so that way they can talk, right? So make sure that we encrypt or protect that. And then you need to remove the keys from the code from the public server. So when you sign up for Shodan account for your lab today, right? If you click on your profile, there's a little entry where it says API key. That key can be used, right, with other application so that way Shodan can work with these other applications. So you would see now, even AI, right, generative AI, you see that there was a big push for API, but now you see like companies use like ChatGPT based, to be able to incorporate that with their website and with their web app all the time, just through API. So for customer service, to be able to market products, etc. So ensure your keys are removed from any kind of publicly exposed servers. So then what is your responsibility as an analyst? What should you monitor on your cloud infrastructure? So first, right, we would start with historical data. Cloud systems are systems that just exist remotely. It's still going to have similar, right, It's going to have requirements. It's not exactly the same as your local server systems. However, you are going to have similar requirement in security. One, you need to look at data, right, that exists on these systems and how that would be managed based on rules. Okay. So historical and current data, you need to look at like the permissions and how the data is accessed, whether it's stored, it's on the move, right? Um, or it's shared. So historical and current data and how the data is being set up to be accessed. Then if there's an incident, right, like a data leak, corruption of data, etc., a breach, attack, right, malware, you need to investigate the incident on the cloud systems. Now, cloud systems come with security tools and on the dashboard. You can use these tools in addition to external tools to be able to manage your cloud platform or your environment. You can also use troubleshooting tools and also any kind of monitoring tools that would help you identify issues um, related to security. Any question? So if you watch my prior videos from a year or two ago, I've done like Azure and AWS with this class. Um, as I mentioned before, I wasn't able to implement Azure because we didn't sign up for free account through the IT department. You don't have to put in the credit card, but we have to be part of their database. But if you like to sign up for the free tier, which requires you to input your credit card, they don't bill you until your credit is up, and it's gonna be a while. They'll give you 100 credit. Uh, you can play with different instances, and they have tutorials and things, resources, also YouTube. You can use it, but I would encourage you to explore, and hopefully down the line I'll be able to use it. Yes, I can write the lab and make you put in the credit card, but not everybody has a credit card these days, so um, that won't be accessible to all students. Okay, so API keys on page 3, and it talks about monitoring. So we need to make sure we check our logs, right? Especially for the SOC, the Security Operation Center. And a lot of the tasks you can also have management dashboard through your cloud platform. Okay, I listed, there's a long list of security tools, and you can pick out some of the ones that you see. If you have seen my video on NCIS 30C, which is Python for cybersecurity, I have incorporated some of these with API. So you can write a script and then you can incorporate some of these applications within that to be able to manage. And some tools are specific to the vendor, like AWS. Some tools are for both, and then some tools are for Azure. So let's start with Scout Suite. This is open source, and you can use this to audit your cloud in different platforms. So that means that if I'm using a lot of companies like this one uses AWS and Azure. So you want to pick a tool that you can also go back and check. So when we say auditing, just means that we will go back and see if there are things that are in place. There are security elements that are going to be in place for our cloud. So for example, we want to check to see if there's credentials, right? Access management for our users and groups in the account, especially for the IT area, like who's configuring these systems, so group membership and so on, and then permission control to your objects, like your files and API keys and so on. So what you see is Scout Suite is a multi-cloud security auditing. That means that you are able to work with some of the mainstream cloud provider. PACU is for AWS framework only. This is for offensive security testing. So if you want to do pen testing for your AWS cloud environment, remember, get permission from Amazon, right? Tell them it's a simple form that you send. Tell them when you're going to do that. So then you can use something like this. And it's if you read their general tutorial and installation guide and all of that, it's pretty simple to start. But I would recommend like testing it before you attempt it. But it would be able to draw out exploitation potential, right? Weaknesses in your AWS accounts, in some of the configuration. If you play with AWS, you would see that IAM, this is common with a lot of platforms, it allows you to manage your user accounts. It's kind of like the Active Directory version on the cloud to create your users and groups and control privilege and access rights and that. So it would draw out and it can perform different range of attacks and so on. Then if you use AWS and Azure, you can also use Prowler. This allows you to do assessment. So when it says assessment, typically there's some pen test component, audits, and incident response. You can also use it for monitoring. So if you use Azure, these are some of the products that you can use. Bloodhound is a common one also. It gives you a visual analysis result setup. So that way, if you like the graphic side of the house, this is a good tool. Azure Car is for Azure environment, and then you would see other options down here. So the list goes on, right? And when you look at something like this, a year from now, you also see additional tools because people create tools for, to streamline their work. Now, if you want PowerShell specific toolkit, um, there are some PowerShell products like PowerShell or Microburst, right? So if you're a PowerShell person, these are some of the options that you can go into. Now for Recon for cloud, it's just a little bit different. If you're looking for Active Directory on Microsoft, right? If you are doing this for pen testing, Recon is your tool. Okay, so I put the link there for you in case you want to check it out. Dumpster Diver can be used for regular systems or cloud system, but this is really good to find keys. In the case that if you're doing blind testing, or analysis where you need to access SSH keys or shared keys, passwords. So it does enumeration. Okay, so now you can just pick any of those, right? You can include the description for them. I just copy and paste the top common ones. It's really coming down to the product that you use, what you're using the tools for. But this industry is about knowledgeable in tools. So if you're knowledge in specific tools, you need to list on your resume because company looks for specific people that can use specific tools. So the more diverse knowledge in your tools, it's helpful. Any question? We don't have a lengthy, assignment today. I will still demo the lab even though Shodan is blocked on our network, right? And I'll talk about that if you missed it earlier. Um, but if you prefer to do it outside of class, I'm totally fine with it. You should be able to access it on your phone or on your home network. The only part that you need, the last part is when you need to get the IP address and you need to run it in your virtual machine. Okay. So often you would see that there is a CASB with Cloud Access Security Broker. This is in our product, right? So we want to learn a little bit more about CASB if you haven't known about it already. So we want to first describe what it is. First, Cloud Access Security Broker is a set of tools, right? Software tools that allows you to, it is a middle tool. So that means that it's allowing the user to interact with their products from the provider. So that means that if I'm using AWS, right, they would be able to give me options for CASV so that way I can uh, access my product with through from my vendor, through my provider, right? So there are two options that you can go with. One is going to be inline. Typically in our field, whenever you see inline, yeah, that would incorporate physical component that is connected on that line. So when you're using an inline CASB, that is a physical logical system, right? That is connected in the same path or in the same area for your cloud, right? Typically, it is a hardware or an endpoint agent that routes the request to the CASV. And this allows us to control how our cloud is connected, the security in the connection and the communication of our cloud. You would need to configure your routes, so network configuration, IP addresses, subnetting, and so on, right? And it's going to be the first interface that's going to acknowledge requests before it sends off to the cloud services. So that it, in a way, it acts as kind of like a barrier to your cloud systems and services. Now, if you want this, right, the service provider, they typically have the option for you to incorporate inline CASB. If you select it, so they already have the appliance on the rack, and then it will just be connecting to that, and then you would go into the configuration of your router and that system to be able to set it up. The second option that you can go with is purely software. This is through API, and it is a way for us to utilize CASB with the program, right? It doesn't interact directly to the user. It is on the provider side, okay? And it doesn't require configuration. So out of the box, if you want API, you don't have to do a lot of management and configuration. It'll just be an integration with your cloud platform. So that's the main difference between an API base, which is strictly vendor on the vendor end, and then the inline CASB is with this actual system and it requires configuration. I'm sorry, let me move 12 down because I still have a little bit more. There you go. And on the last part, right, it still functioned as a barrier. Like I said, it does block requests that doesn't meet the rules or the criteria. Um, and it would you don't need to monitor too much activity. And in the case that if the rules are violated, it does give you a report or the notification. So depending on how the purpose of your cloud platform, I think this is what you select. And so if you and also the model that you want to use. This is more convenience, but probably if you are looking at heavy scale, it might not accommodate it too much if you have a lot of connectivity, a lot of requests. It's still able to handle the block requests, but if you want to do an inline because you have, a large infrastructure, or you can go with the other option. It's really depending on the admin and how you want to scale that. So it's generally a short chapter. You can go back and reread the notes, and then go over some of the definition again. Some of the questions for our final exam and quiz will come from this chapter. And if you're looking to take a Cloud Plus class, we do have one right now. It's under the IT Project Management Certificate, CIS 48A. I never finalized the cloud certificate because I just don't have enough faculty to be able to teach out those courses. And if we create the course and don't teach them, they would also get removed anyway. So, um, but I would encourage you, I know RCC has AWS certificate. I encourage you to get, some skill sets in this area because everybody uses cloud. So, it's always good to show that you know. Any question? Hopefully I have enough juice. Okay, so there are only 12 questions for the assignment. We're gonna stop this.